Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind that looks peaceful from the outside. She sat across from me at a Starbucks near campus, tapping her pen against a notebook full of unfinished lectures. Her tone was light, detached, like she was just sharing a random thought. But what she said cut the air between us in half. "You always have to be right, don't you?" She didn't look up. "Even when you're wrong." I remember staring at the steam rising from her cup instead of answering. I was used to her moods, the small emotional storms that passed as quickly as they came. But that morning, something shifted. It wasn't her words. It was the casual cruelty in how she said them. Like she wanted to see what I'd do if she pushed a little harder. Our friend, Daniel, the guy who owned the coffee shop we often visited together, came by our table. He smiled too easily, stayed too long. She laughed at something he said, that kind of laugh people use when they're testing boundaries. I caught the glance she gave him as he walked away. It wasn't love. It was defiance. A small, deliberate rebellion. I didn't react. I didn't need to. Silence is heavier than anger when you know how to use it. I finished my drink, paid for both, and walked out without a word. On the drive home in my Toyota Camry, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't trying to connect anymore. She was trying to prove I couldn't control what was already collapsing. That night she stayed late, claiming she was grading papers at Daniel's cafe. I didn't check. I didn't ask. I simply noticed the distance had finally stopped feeling temporary. The next morning, I went to Costco alone, our usual Sunday ritual, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt organized, clean, predictable, like the rest of my life was about to be. She thought silence meant surrender. But she didn't understand. Silence is where control begins. A week later, Daniel texted me by mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. A screenshot popped up on my iPhone. A group message from him meant for someone else. My wife's name sat right above a half-written sentence about keeping things quiet. I stared at it for a full minute before locking the screen. I didn't reply. I didn't even breathe differently. When you're a lawyer, silence is your sharpest weapon. You learn that people reveal everything if you just let them think you're not watching. That night, she came home smelling like roasted beans and someone else's cologne. She kissed me on the cheek, distracted, like she was performing a ritual she no longer believed in. I noticed she'd started wearing lipstick again, not for work, not for me, just for the idea of being noticed. She moved around the house like nothing had shifted, but her eyes couldn't hold mine anymore. I spent the next few days observing, not reacting. Her laptop, a silver MacBook we both used, synced automatically to the home cloud. I didn't search for anything. The notifications just came. Her messages were written in half sentences, poetic and careless, the kind of words people use when they want to feel dangerous. Daniel replied like a teenager. It wasn't love. It was ego feeding ego. I didn't confront her. I didn't change passwords or pack a bag. I went to work, argued cases, came home, and pretended everything was still fine. But inside, the balance had already flipped. She thought she'd taken control by breaking the rules. What she didn't see was that I'd stopped playing altogether. Late one evening, she told a story about a friend who felt trapped in a perfect marriage. She said the friend just wanted space to make her own mistakes. I listened without interrupting. She looked disappointed when I didn't argue. That's when I realized what she was really addicted to. Not love, not attention, but conflict. And the moment I refused to give her that, she started losing power. It didn't take long before the evidence stopped being subtle. One afternoon, while reviewing a client's contract on the MacBook, a message popped up from Daniel. The words were ordinary, but the tone was unmistakable. He mentioned a night I wasn't part of, a private joke that didn't belong to me. I didn't open it. I just watched the preview fade from the corner of the screen like a quiet confession. Most people react in anger. I reacted with precision. I copied the files I needed for work, logged out, and placed the laptop on her desk like it was something fragile and already broken. When she came home, she was distracted, humming to herself as she unpacked groceries from Costco. She didn't notice the tension in the air. She moved around the kitchen like everything was still normal, but I could see the cracks forming in her performance. The way she avoided looking at me, the pause before she answered simple questions. Every small gesture became a paragraph in a story she didn't know I was already reading. That night, I stood outside for a long time, watching the reflection of our living room through the window. She was inside, sitting on the couch, typing on her phone with a faint smile. I didn't need to guess who she was writing to. The truth was no longer hidden, it was routine. Instead of confronting her, I started cleaning my office. Clearing drawers, deleting files, organizing my desk like someone preparing for a new phase. Calm isn't weakness, it's preparation. And in that silence, something in me shifted. The next morning, she tried to act affectionate, almost too much. I stayed still, polite but distant. She thought my quietness was confusion. It wasn't. It was clarity. I had enough proof to destroy everything, but I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in precision, the kind that leaves no room for chaos. That was the moment I stopped being her husband emotionally. The paperwork would just make it official. 2 days later, I disappeared. Not dramatically, quietly. I took a week off work, packed a small bag, and drove out before sunrise. I left my phone on the kitchen counter, face down, next to her untouched cup of coffee. By the time she woke up, I was already 2 states away. No messages, no explanations. Just absence. I stayed in a small roadside motel near the highway, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions. My car was parked where no one would notice it. I spent the days walking, thinking, watching strangers live ordinary lives. For the first time in years, I felt like an observer instead of a participant. The silence that used to suffocate me now felt clean. She started calling by afternoon. The calls went from calm to desperate. Then came the emails, short, defensive, emotional. She wanted to talk, to fix what she still didn't understand she'd already broken. I didn't respond. You can't negotiate with someone who still believes they did nothing wrong. A mutual friend texted to say she'd been looking for me at Daniel's cafe, asking if he'd heard anything. The irony didn't escape me. She'd built her world around control, and now she couldn't even find what she'd lost. I didn't hide out of fear. I stayed away to let the silence do what words couldn't. On the 5th night, I stopped by a Waffle House near the motel. It was quiet, mostly truckers and night shift workers. I sat there with black coffee and thought about how peace doesn't always feel good at first. It feels hollow, almost too calm to trust. But it grows. By the 7th morning, her tone had changed. No more anger, no more justification. Just short, scared messages. Where are you? Please call. I'm sorry. That's when I knew the shift had begun. I didn't need to say anything. My absence was louder than any confrontation could ever be. When I came back, nothing in the house looked different, but the air had changed. She was sitting at the table, phone in hand, pretending not to have waited all night. Her voice trembled as she asked if I'd been clearing my head. I just nodded. There was no anger in me, only distance. That was worse for her. She tried to fill the silence with excuses, stories that didn't hold up under their own weight. I listened, but only because I wanted to remember the sound of what no longer mattered. Daniel's cafe had closed suddenly that week. A friend from the courthouse mentioned something about an inspection, about permits that hadn't been renewed. I hadn't done anything directly, but I had filed a quiet complaint through the right channel. Anonymous, factual, lawful. Actions have consequences. I didn't need revenge. I only needed the truth to breathe for a while. She looked smaller now, less certain. Her eyes kept searching my face for a reaction that wasn't coming. I knew she was realizing that emotional power doesn't work on someone who's already detached. The silence between us became a mirror she couldn't look away from. I started sleeping in the guest room. No arguments, no explanations. Just a subtle reorganization of space. She tried to ask if we could start over, but her tone was too careful, like she was negotiating instead of apologizing. I told her nothing. Words had lost their meaning. At night, I could hear her crying softly in the next room. Not out of guilt, but out of loss. The loss of control, of certainty, of being the center of something stable. By the end of the week, I'd gathered the documents. The petition for divorce sat neatly in a folder on my desk. There was no drama in it, just facts. Date, signature, reason. Nothing personal. The next morning, I put on my suit and went to the courthouse. Calm. Focused. She didn't know it yet, but the game she thought she controlled was already over. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. She showed up 15 minutes late, hair undone, hands shaking slightly as she fumbled with her papers. I was already there, seated beside my attorney, calm, collected, and perfectly silent. When she entered, She expected a reaction, a flicker of emotion, maybe even a look of anger. But I gave her nothing. Just eye contact, steady and unreadable. She spoke first. Her voice was defensive, desperate to sound confident. She said we were just going through a phase, that every marriage had gray areas. She blamed stress, work, even me, my discipline, my silence, my so-called control. The judge listened, unimpressed. When it was my turn, I didn't look at her. I just stated the facts. My words were precise, my tone flat. When the judge asked if I had anything else to add, I paused. Then I said quietly, "Accidents have consequences." That was it. No explanation, no accusation. Just a truth that hung in the air longer than any outburst could. She turned to look at me, as if searching for the man she used to manipulate. But he wasn't there anymore. All she saw was calmness she couldn't shake. It unsettled her more than anger ever could. Afterward, outside the courthouse, she tried to talk. Her eyes were wet, but her pride kept her from breaking completely. She said she didn't think I'd actually go through with it. I nodded once, said nothing, and walked away. My car felt different that day. Quiet, like even the air inside understood the weight of closure. That evening, I drove to a Waffle House again. The same seat, same coffee. This time it didn't feel like escape. It felt like arrival. I watched people laugh, argue, live without the heaviness I'd carried for years. Somewhere between the hum of the neon sign and the silence in my chest, I realized I didn't lose anything that day. She did. She just hadn't realized it yet. In the weeks after the hearing, she tried to rebuild a life that no longer fit her. People noticed before she did. Her friends stopped inviting her out. Her colleagues kept conversations short. Even Daniel had vanished from the city, his cafe replaced by a for lease sign. Everything she'd used to feed her pride had quietly collapsed. I didn't orchestrate it. I simply stepped back and let truth work at its own pace. I moved into a small apartment downtown. Simple, clean, no memories attached. My evenings became structured: gym, dinner, reading. My peace wasn't loud, it was measured. She texted once, asking if we could talk like adults. I didn't reply. When you stop feeding chaos, it starves itself. A month later, I saw her at a grocery store near my office. She looked thinner, distracted. She noticed me by the checkout line, froze for a second, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded politely, nothing more. That brief moment, her searching face, my calm stillness, told the whole story. Control had changed hands completely. At night, I sometimes checked Hulu, scrolling through shows I'd never had time to watch before. It's strange how quiet can feel like luxury once you've earned it. There were no more sudden calls, no tension hiding in every silence. Just space. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard she'd started spending her evenings alone, grading papers at home, replaying every decision that led to this point. She didn't tell anyone what happened between us, but people could see it in her, the hesitation, the faded confidence. It wasn't humiliation. It was realization. For her, my calm had been the final betrayal. She couldn't fight it, couldn't interpret it, couldn't manipulate it. It wasn't revenge, and that made it worse. Because deep down, she knew that I didn't hate her. I had simply stopped needing her. And for someone who lived on control, that was the one loss she couldn't rationalize. It was 3 months before she showed up at my office. I'd just finished a case when the receptionist said my ex-wife was in the lobby. Her presence still had weight, but not the kind that pulled me anymore. She looked different, tired, humbled. Her voice was soft when she said she only wanted 5 minutes. I nodded, mostly out of curiosity. She sat across from me, eyes darting around the room, searching for the version of me she once knew. She tried to sound calm, but couldn't hide the tremor in her tone. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that she realized how much she'd taken for granted. Then she said something that almost sounded like an apology, but not quite. It was still filtered through pride, still coated with justification. I listened, silent. The same silence that once drove her mad now terrified her. She asked if I hated her. I said no. That single word made her flinch more than shouting ever could. Because indifference cuts deeper than anger. She started crying, quietly, the kind of tears that come when the illusion finally breaks. She said she missed us, but even that word felt empty now. There was no us. There was her world, and then there was mine, and they no longer overlapped. Before leaving, She asked if we could ever try again, from the beginning. I didn't answer right away. I stood, walked her to the door, and said, "Beginnings only work when both people show up." Then I walked back to my desk. That night, I didn't feel triumphant, just still. The kind of stillness that follows a storm that's finally run out of power. I realized she hadn't come for closure. She'd come for validation. But the version of me who needed to explain or prove anything to her no longer existed. And that was the most powerful silence of all. After that day, I didn't hear from her for a while. The silence between us became a landscape, wide, empty, final. I didn't block her, didn't erase her number. I just stopped being reachable. That's the kind of boundary people can feel even when no words define it. From what I heard, her life had become smaller. The colleagues who once admired her passion now kept their distance. Her friends, most of whom were part of our old circle, had chosen neutrality, which, in her mind, felt like betrayal. She'd been the one to create the fracture, but she was the one left standing in the debris. One evening, I saw her again by coincidence. She was sitting alone in that same Starbucks where everything had started. Same corner table, same notebook, but her energy was gone. The spark she used to wield so easily had dimmed. I watched from outside, unseen, and for a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who once thrived on control now looked like someone waiting for permission to breathe. Back home, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, lights dim, coffee cooling beside me. It struck me that I hadn't thought about her in days. Real peace doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, unnoticed, until you realize it's everywhere. Later that week, a message appeared on my phone. Her name on the screen again. The text was short. "You were right about everything." I read it once, locked the screen, and set the phone face down on the table. There was nothing left to say. She wanted a reaction, maybe even forgiveness, something to close the loop. But closure isn't something you give someone. It's what they earn by facing the silence they created. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No anger, no noise, just calm. The kind that doesn't fade when morning comes. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm I didn't expect but quickly learned to value. Work stayed steady, my focus sharper than ever. I saw friends again, old ones who used to say I'd disappeared inside my marriage. They were right. Back then, I existed only to manage her chaos. Now, I lived quietly, fully, without needing to be understood. One evening, I drove past our old neighborhood. The lights in what used to be our house were still on, but they looked different, dimmer, less alive. A figure moved past the window, and even from the road, I could tell it was her. Alone, still orbiting a story that had already ended. I didn't stop. Some places don't belong to you anymore, even if your memories do. Later that night, sitting at a small table in the same Waffle House I'd found months before, I realized the full circle had closed. The waitress recognized me, poured my coffee without asking. The same hum of neon, the same low murmur of strangers. But this time, the silence felt earned. I thought about what she'd said in that last message, that I was right about everything. Maybe I was. But being right had never been the point. Understanding had. And sometimes understanding means accepting that not every apology comes with a change. People think walking away is about anger or pride. It isn't. It's about peace. About learning that the absence of noise can be the loudest truth of all. She never took responsibility for what she did. But my calm after her chaos changed everything. First for me, then for her. Because when a man finally stops arguing, when he stops defending, when he simply disappears from the places he was never respected, something irreversible happens. The power shifts. As I finished my coffee and looked out the window, I thought of one final truth she'd never hear from me, but would feel forever. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't valued. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.